Hi, it's Ralph and Lahni again with another episode of Astrologers Chatting Over Coffee. And I think that people really enjoy talking about people's charts, that they can imagine their life because they've heard about them in the news or in the media or on television, etc. It's a great learning tool, not just for people who are new to astrology, but just to update yourself on how the transits to certain aspects in people's charts actually play out. So since we're in a time of heavy campaigning, we thought we would look at some charts for candidates. We've had a very large field of candidates this go round, and they've been whittled down just a little bit. So we're at this kind of midpoint in that candidate winnowing period.
Yeah, we're smaller than a mob now. We're kind of like a big team, suitable for what team has 10 players on it at this point.
Well, and this is being recorded at a time when we're getting ready for the third debate that has narrowed down the Democratic candidates to 10 candidates. And I think it's interesting kind of to see like maybe why these are the 10. And which of these, what kind of motivates these people for jumping into this sort of fire with both feet? It's a very kind of stressful process, and the idea that you can lead a country is a very intimidating one. What is it about people's charts that make them think that they're up to the task and that they're the one?
Yeah. And there's some really interesting components that have risen to the surface as we've looked at this. Is, for instance, the last two Democratic presidents were both Leos. Clinton and Obama were both Leos. And this time around, there's no Leos. Not a one. Where it's a lot of different signs, but not a one. And you would think with a large group, especially we start off with 20-some-odd people, there would be some Leos in there. But in this main group, there's no Leos there. In fact, there's a number of signs that are not represented.
Well, and maybe we should kind of talk about which ones are sort of highlighted because, if I just go down this list of 10, I see Scorpio, Taurus, Capricorn, Virgo, Libra, Gemini, Libra, Virgo, Cancer, and Capricorn. So we've got some doubling of some signs that you would expect. To me, the Capricorn energy is a logical one for someone who wants to lead. Don't you think? And of course, we're just talking strict sun signs here for the first part of it. And people can have strong Capricorn in their chart, even if they are a Leo or an Aquarius or it doesn't mean that the sun sign is the be all end all. But, I thought it was interesting that the Capricorn and of course the Virgo, who would be a better person to, dot the I's, cross the T's, sign the contracts, and serve the people. Right, exactly. Yes. Perfect.
Well, it's funny because there's two Virgos, there's two Capricorns, and there's another pairing. Who is the third pairing? Are there two Librans? So you get, out of 10 people, you got 3 signs that dominate.
Well, I think Libra is a perfect one also. Libra is a strong sign for the legal system, the balance of the scales, if we do this, we have to balance it off with this, balancing budgets and those kinds of concerns and issues are very kind of Libran. So it's not kind of surprising this would be.
What is surprising, though, is that the last 2 presidents that we've had that were Librans were Eisenhower and Carter. Neither of which were attorneys.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, the first one, of course, was a military man, a career military man. And, of course, Carter had been also a military man. He had been on submarines and then became a peanut farmer who then became governor. So it's interesting, the patterns that you see.
Well, and, of course, missing from this lineup of 10 that we have left at the time that we're recording this, as you said, is Aquarius, and at least in our lifetime, the only president who was an Aquarian was Ronald Reagan. And, we always talk about Aquarius being kind of the shepherd energy, watching over the flock. and that is kind of an energy, again, that you would kind of expect to be interested in running for office. I'm sure that there are other offices. Maybe there's more of a predominance in offices that have more direct contact with the public.
Well,
it's
interesting. We have two Virgos running, Bernie Sanders and Julian Castro, the two Virgos. And the most recent Virgo president we've had was Johnson. And Johnson was a tremendously successful president, in part because he had been a legislator for so long and just was tremendously influenced. He was also the tallest of the presidents, which was kind of interesting. And then you also have the two Capricorns are interesting because it's Andrew Yang and it's Pete Buttigieg. The two youngest of the two are the two Capricorns, and Capricorn is seen as the old sign.
Well, and that's something that is fairly well established as one of the traits of a Capricorn energy. They're kind of old when they're young and young when they're old, sort of an energy, especially when it's at the rising, but the sun has that quality about it as well.
And then, of course, the two Librans, which is interesting, is is Kamala Harris from the great state of California, and Beto O'Rourke from the great state of Texas. And those are the two Librans, And of course, Kamala is, of course, an important attorney. I mean, she's been the attorney general of the state, and now, of course, is our senator. I don't think Beto O'Rourke actually is holding office currently. He's actually another September birth, as is Sanders and Julian Castro. A lot of Septembers.
I find it interesting that Cory Booker is the only Taurus. Now, of course, that is another earth sign, so grounded and sort of in logic and but the difference between the Taurian energy and the Capricorn energy is that the Taurian is really concerned about sort of personal comfort of his close environment. And a lot of what I've heard him talking about is, the violence in his neighborhood and, making people feel safe. Whereas the things that are more interest to the Capricorn energy, Andrew Yang, for example, is talking about a guaranteed income for people. So they're all talking about caring for the people, but with sort of different, one is kind of protecting and the other one is enhancing.
Well, it's interesting. There's also Amy Klobuchar, who is a Gemini, a May Gemini, but a Gemini, which of course is the sign of our current president. And the last Gemini we had before that was Kennedy.
Exactly.
JFK was another Gemini.
Well, now those are three significantly different people, all Geminis.
Very, very
so
different.
Throw out all your sun sign ideas, you know what I mean?
Well, it's very interesting that the current president and George W. Bush and Clinton were all born within several months of each other.
Yeah, the same year.
In June, July, and August.
All Yang fire dogs.
Yes.
Which I love the kind of Chinese relationship, the Chinese zodiac relationship to the Western zodiac, because the year of the dog is that Libran energy. So even if you don't think somebody has obvious Libra in their chart, it can be helpful to see what their Chinese animal year is. And of course, fire is somebody who takes the bull by the horns, so to speak, And so it gives you a lot of insight into that group of people born that Jupiter year. It's not a calendar year because the Chinese New Year starts somewhere between the middle of January and the middle of February. So it doesn't go to the whole calendar year, but 1946 and all of them were born after the year had changed. So that's that Libran energy showing.
Well, I'll tell you, if they let the astrologers do legislation, we could have set up a rule that you could not have too many presidents from too small an area. Because it means you would basically be repeating a bit of the same pattern because, Saturn would be in the same place, Jupiter would be in the same place, the outer planets. And would we really want to keep repeating that pattern? I think not. But
Well, depends on how good the pattern is.
That's
But you're
true.
right. You're right. And speaking of patterns, we're looking at, people are talking about who the front runners are. And they've been talking about that since there was a field of 25. And now there's a field of 10. And that talk hasn't really changed very much. But not trying to get, overtly political in one way or another. When you talk about people like Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is born in 1941. Joe Biden is born in 1942. One is a Scorpio, one's a Virgo. But the fact is that I think what part of the challenge for them, even though they are billed as the front runners, I think part of the challenge is that this election is so much about what the future of our youth is going to be. And I think that sort of older ideas are being put on trial here. I think that as the youth gets out the vote and they realize that the decisions that are going to be made today and in the near future are going to affect them and their children more so than people who are already of a certain age now. I think that's going to be the X factor in this whole decision making. Is there somebody that is going to be able to protect the youth and the future needs of the planet and the people here? I find it interesting that two people surfaced as a possible contenders for the Republican nominee, but the years go 1946, 1945, 46, 47. They're all within 2 years of each other. Joe Walsh is born a Scorpio, born in 1947. Bill Weld is a Leo, born in 1945. So they're part of that older group, the same age as Bill Clinton and, George W. Bush. And so is that going to appeal to the youth? So I think that if the youth vote gets really, really organized and rallied, that could be a problem for both parties.
It's funny. This actually makes me think of the fact that traditionally, the only professions are the two professions, actually they're the same profession, that where people come to their work, their career late in life are kings, queens, and popes. And that usually at the age in which most people are retiring, they actually become that role. And I've oftentimes said that, the one of the presidents that we actually didn't do research on because he preceded Truman was
Roosevelt.
FDR, Roosevelt. And it was really Roosevelt that in some ways established what I call the imperial presidency. He redesigned the office and turned it into the Oval Office. He did a lot of things that really made him closer to being a king. And he came from this patrician background.
That redesign of the office of the president into the Oval Office is a feng shui faux pas that we should devote an entire episode to. But I'm sorry for
We actually have a
interrupting.
book titled that, one of our Kindle books, which is titled, Is It Time to Redesign the Oval Office?
Right. It really set up a very different dynamic in the presidency.
Yeah, and every president since then has left the same pattern, even though before then, every president set it up differently. But then Roosevelt created this room around him, basically. Remember, he was serving his third term when he passed away.
Well, and of course, it served his needs because he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And this way, he was always, he could hide the wheelchair and his legs from behind the desk. And so his access was made a little bit easier by having that.
And he had the very bright sun because when you were facing the desk, you were facing south. So you would have bright sun on your face, and his face was always in shadow. And it was his way to be able to expose people and still be able to hide his own feelings. It was a very, very smart dynamic, but every other president since then has taken advantage of it. What's funny is that most of the presidents actually don't use it that way. They sit on the couches across from each other because they're used to being more of a team player, where he really was a kind of patrician king. And this idea that we would have at the current president right now is the oldest president we've ever had in 200 plus years. And here we have two people running Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, Vice President Biden, who would be then the even oldest president
And
ever.
again, this is why I think that the youth is really making their voice heard, and that's going to make it difficult for these older candidates to really win the youth vote.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge because, we always say, well, teenagers don't want to listen to adults. Oh, you should go into this field or this, and the teenagers always are like, I don't know if I want to go in this direction, and we always see that as being rebellious. But in fact, when they've actually done studies on this and psychological work on it, they realize that the kids are right. And the reason is, and we know as astrologers, transits change. What's important now is not going to be the same things in terms of the career world as is important in 10 years from now. A lot of careers that exist today did not exist when we were entering the workforce a few years ago.
That's for sure.
Because you have different planetary transits. Things evolve. Well, the same kind of thing. Having your leaders be current with the time allows them to have a sensitivity to that time. And, Bernie and Joe both were born at the very beginning, the very front edge of the boomer generation. They both have Pluto, like here's, Joe has Pluto at 7 degrees Leo. Bernie has it at probably 8, at 5 degrees because it was retrograde for a while. So that's early on. And the Pluto and Leo generation really describes to a great extent the boomer generation, and now Pluto, is in Capricorn.
Well, and it's interesting. We have actual birth times on both Bernie and Joe Biden, and with their charts being just a year apart, it's interesting to see how much difference there is in sort of their priorities in terms of how they would tell people they want to govern.
Well, it's funny that they're in what I call the pawn signs. They have a dominance in those two signs. The two pawn signs are the Virgos and the Scorpios, and it's because those are the signs that are ruled by Mercury and Mars. And in other words, they're the ones that will walk into situations without thinking about it. They love to be around people. They love to get things done. They oftentimes will do stuff without thinking about the cost. It's one of the things that makes them very likable. And on the chessboard, they would be the pawns. They would be the guys in the front that you send out there and say, hey, here's the spear. Go check this out before we show up, before the royalty shows up. They're also both feminine signs. They're both, responsive to people, which is one of the things that makes them likable. They do listen. And both of them have numerous points in the sign, though with Joe it's even more. Joe Biden is more obvious with the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Mars in Scorpio. He's a very Scorpionic person. He's also born just before the full moon with the moon in Capricorn. So very emotionally disciplined and emotionally ambitious. Bernie was born, it's funny, we just realized we had his birth time today. Bernie is born with a moon in Aries. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just said that I was right, that Joe was born right before the full moon. I looked at
It's not in Capricorn, it's a Taurus
moon in Taurus, right, the nicest of moons.
That's why he's always filmed at and visiting restaurants and diners and eating food and stuff.
Oh, yes.
The Taurus moon is well known for that.
Yeah, so back when he walks, whenever you see those scenes, you walk in, it's like he glows. It's also very...
you say Philly cheesesteak, and he's a happy guy, right?
Exactly, which is an important thing for a politician. Where Bernie has his moon in Aries, he tends to be more rambunctious since it conjunct Mars.
Well, and that, just off the cuff, an Aries moon is not a ushy-gushy moon. It's like, what's in it for me? Or it's my way, or I have this idea and that's the only way to go. And that's why there are people who can't warm up to Bernie, although he has a Venus in Libra, which is why he has some very strong supporters who identify with him, in that Libran Venus kind of quality,
and Mercury in Libra, and he has the Vesta in Libra. He has a very, very strong sense of fair. He's been talking about
dedication, mission.
fair for years and years. In fact, what he's
50.
saying now isn't any different from what he was saying years ago.
Right.
Just people are listening to because things are more unfair than they have been in a long
Well, and
time.
it's new to the younger generation or that
Yeah.
mid-generation that's really makes up a large block of his staunchest supporters.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting that Elizabeth Warren in the leads is the one Cancerian. And remember, George W. Bush was another Cancerian. In fact, he was born only like 2 days away from July 4th.
I just want to mention that both Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have Mars in a Mars-ruled sign.
Oh.
So
yeah, that's
they're
true.
the different rulerships of Mars. Bernie is in Aries, and Joe Biden is in Scorpio. So his power can be a little bit understated and behind the scenes, even, you don't see it as much, but the kind of power that Bernie has is the only way that he can sort of convey that is by really forcefully yelling it out, that kind of thing. I'm serious.
It's true that it is how it comes forth. That's
Yeah.
true. Where Joe's more of
With Joe, you feel like there's a lot more that he doesn't say.
going on behind the surface.
Keeps it close to the vest. He's got the Mercury in Scorpio too. So when he lets it fly, he can let it fly too. But
but he does it from the 12th house. So he does it from a place where behind the scenes is one of the places he really operates well. But he has the Sagittarius rising. And
so he's happy to get out there and glad hand everybody.
Yeah, and it goes back to
For
the
sure.
Jupiter in Cancer. So when you glad hand you feel taken care of.
Bernie has Scorpio rising for those of you who are taking notes.
Yes, exactly, and which is really kind of obvious. I think we should look at Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris. I think their charts are just fascinating.
Well, and that would round out the top sort of 4 that go up in the polls right about now. And I find it interesting that, we only included, for the purposes of time, we only included the top 10 that made it into this debate that's upcoming. But anybody from the 50s was knocked out.
Yeah, incredibly unfair.
So we've got the people in the 40s, and then we've got Kamala Harris, who's born in 1964. So that's a big, big difference, even between her and Elizabeth Warren, who's born in 1949, almost in the 50s, but not quite. So,
yes, they've knocked out the best generation. Nevertheless, I think Elizabeth Warren's chart's fascinating. She's born at 00 degrees Cancer, conjunct Uranus in Cancer to the degree. They call it a partile conjunction to that degree. Uranus is about changing stuff. It's about being electrifying. And boy, does it show up in her chart conjunct there. And people normally who... Rebellious, but in desire to transform. And because it's in Cancer, it has a lot to do about homes and families. And this is one of the reasons why this is a major issue for her, is homes and families.
She also has Venus in Cancer. So she is really, Cancer is often thought of as the sign of the mother, and she could really mother people by making sure that they get health insurance and they get equal pay. And, it's like mom writing a note to your boss saying, you should pay her as much as it pay a man.
And she has the same Taurus moon as Joe Biden does. So once again, a person who loves to go out to lunch, and also has that kind of emotional stability. It's actually the one thing about the moon of Taurus. It's emotionally a very stable sign. But then what's interesting, I think, is that she has Mercury in rulership and Gemini conjunct Mars. So she is a great thinker. And she can communicate really well and very quickly. And, you get into an argument with her, you got to hold on to your seat because she's going to take off on you. A great debater.
Well, and let's get to Kamala because we don't want to run out of time and not be able to really address the ones that we want to see. But she's born exactly at the full moon. What that means is her sun is at 27 degrees Libra and the moon is at 27 degrees Aries. Now, we do have a time for her. We do not have a time for Elizabeth Warren. So if anybody out there has it, send me an email.
Including you, Elizabeth.
Anyway, she's born at the full moon. And full mooners very often have sort of that big picture view, because the signs are opposite. So if they really gather all the information and can really see both sides of an argument, that's why she's a good lawyer. That's why she's a good advocate, because she can look at everything from both sides. That Aries moon makes her strong and tough. It's in the 11th house, so that's where people see her. 11th house is the electorate, the population, the people, the you know, your peers that you connect with. So she's seen strong as a strong individual there. She has Gemini rising, so she's going to appear youthful.
The attorney as well. That's the advocate and the attorney and the thinker. And then remember that you go back to that Mercury in Scorpio, and you can see that where that was the prosecutor.
And she has 3 planets in Virgo. Venus, Uranus, and Pluto. She's born in that Uranus-Pluto conjunction generation. And so the taking care of the details, not just for personal with the Venus, but for the broader community and as a change agent for people, taking care of all the little details and, you know, making sure that everyone gets taken care of, along with that Mars in Leo, doing it in an outward bound, heartfelt way. You can see heartfelt emotion.
Oh yeah, well, the Mars and Leo, you know, and she can bring it into what she says. What's interesting is that Saturn, highly elevated in the chart in Aquarius, in its classic ruling position, along with the Vesta and the Chiron and Pisces, he truly believes in government. She truly believes in its healing abilities, but she is ambitious, but she's ambitious as a shepherd. You know, she really wants to be in the situation of being able to help move the flock in the correct direction. You know.
Well, I think it's interesting that her Mercury is in Scorpio. So when pushed, she can push your buttons, or she can, you know, cut you off with that hidden detail that pops up. Whereas Elizabeth Warren has Mercury conjunct Mars in Gemini. So she has a very facile mind, you know, and she's, you know, an economist, and she can really keep those numbers, and those figures come very quickly to her, you know, so she can put all that into perspective in a very personal way.
Well, you know, between that Sun in the 5th house trying the rising, and then that dramatic Mars in Leo in the 3rd house, and then the Mercury in Scorpio, you imagine that in the courtroom, she was very impressive. She would really impress people. She really was able to bring everything together and get to the point. But that's about all we can cover today. Maybe we have to do a second episode on this one and deal with the younger folks.
We do. We've got charts for the other people, so maybe we'll do an episode too.
Yes, looking forward for it. And please come back and see us again here at Astrologers Chatting Over Coffee. And you can also come and see the forecast at Planetary Calendar. Visit planetarycalendar.com.
And if we don't broadcast the rest of them, you can go to spaceandtime.com. Maybe we'll make a recording of the other candidates and put it live on there.
It sounds wonderful. Okay.
Thanks.